museum back to life.
You know, people sit out on the front porch hoping people will come by.
Go forth and do good.
It's insane. I have the most understanding wife in the world.
I treat everybody the same thing.
Oh, that's the other thing I love about Marietta. It's like a melting pot.
You are listening to Marietta Stories. Each week, veteran podcaster Bill Nowicki brings you the heartwarming, interesting, and fun stories from the people that make the community of Marietta, Georgia, a place to call home. Here's your host, Bill Nowicki.
Brad Hawkins is one of those people that is passionate about something, and now he's making a difference. And he runs the Aviation History and Technology Center, which is on Perrin Road, which is just off of Atlanta Road, southeast in Marietta, near Lockheed Martin. Open air museum. They have really neat things to see, and I walked around and had a great time with him. Now, you go to visit MariettaGA.com to learn all about what's going on in Marietta, and I love working with the Visitors Bureau. Got to spend a lot of time with those folks. They're super cool. Going back to Brad, he's one of those young people that brings a new vibrancy to the city. I predict you're going to see much great things coming up. And by the way, Oktoberfest is coming up, so check that out. Sally McCulley puts on a great event every year. It's one of my favorites. Here's Mr. Doug Lester, one of the volunteers, and then Brad Hawkins. What's your name?
Doug. Yeah. My wife thinks I'm nuts. 37 years at Lockheed. Told me one time, if you ever cut your finger, you'll bleed aircraft all over the place. Probably. Yesterday, July the 8th, I started with Lockheed 58 years ago. 1963 in July. 6 weeks before they built the first 141.
Yeah, so this was a big part of your life growing up even.
Oh, yeah. People that live around Marietta avoided Lockheed's shift change because it was bumper to bumper coming out that main gate. Yeah.
Sounds like you were real proud of working here, too.
Well, when you spend nearly 40 years, that's all you know, you know. Even my screensaver with my cell phone is that gunship right there.
What was your favorite job at Lockheed?
I was trained as a machinist, but I've held many other classifications. Spent 8 years in structural assembly, tool and die, jig and fixture, which build the project tool that hold the parts. And 28 years in machine shop.
So you remember like all the different panels, the pieces, the engine parts?
Yeah, I worked structural assembly for 7 years on how they build the aircraft, and I was in tool and die and jig and fixture where they build the actual project holding tools.
Well, yeah, it was a pleasure meeting you, Doug. I want to get with Brad. What should I talk to him about?
Well, he's picked up a lot since he's been here. Yeah.
Well, that's good.
It's the first time I've ever talked to a fuzzy rabbit.
Yeah, that's a fuzzy thing on the end of my mic. But yeah, I appreciate it, Doug, and I hope to see you around.
All right, thank you.
All right, Brad, we're going to walk around. This is a huge area.
That it is. We actually have about 4 acres here inside the fence, and we have room to grow. We have under our lease with the Air Force here on Air Force Plant 6, we have a total of 15.5 acres. So we have room to grow, and that's namely our number one goal, is to try and grow this museum into something that resembles the aviation legacy here in this local community.
So when you came here 2 years ago and you met somebody like Doug, what was your first task to try to get your head around this job?
So I grew up as an aviation enthusiast. My background is history. That's where my education is. Honestly, I feel like I'm a 12-year-old kid again. Yeah. To be able to be around the aircraft, to hear the stories of the veterans, to hear the stories of the inside stories from Lockheed and the manufacturing. Wrapping my head around it is still, every day is a treat. I learn something new every day from a lot of our staff, from guests, from research. So I don't know that I can wrap my head around it, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Well, you must get, like, somebody will start talking and it's like an hour goes by and it's like, I have a list of things I wanted to get done. It must happen all the time in this job.
It absolutely does. It's one of those things, but that's part of the job. Right. It's learning. It's how do we represent the tens of hundreds of thousands of people that have had an impact on the local aviation legacy. So you have Naval Air Station Atlanta that was here from 59 to 2009. You have the Bell Bomber plant that kind of started the aviation legacy back in World War II. You have 70 years nearly of Lockheed's influence on this community and the thousands and thousands of employees, the people that have moved here and support industries, the people's parents that worked at these different facilities, the people that come here and visit us and tell us stories of their interaction with these aircraft. Yeah. So whether it's a Lockheed aircraft or one of our other aircraft here, the ripple effect of our local community on global affairs and on global events is astonishing. And as a historian, that to me is just learning to listen.
Yeah, and there's so many layers to it. Like, let's take listeners back to before Lockheed was here in the Bell Bomber plant. What was Marietta like, and what did this plant do to Marietta?
So where we're standing right now was likely a cotton field or a pig lot. A lot of Marietta and Cobb County were agricultural based. It was outside of Atlanta, but it still had a very agricultural feel to the community. The square was the center of commerce. Things were moving and shaking there, but outside of Marietta and some of the smaller towns, Smyrna and some of the other towns that were around, it was pastures, it was woods, it was fields. And with aviation, that has changed everything about this community. Aviation, I like to tell people, aviation is in our DNA here in this community. And there's no simpler way to say it other than aviation's in our DNA. It's at our core. It has resulted in so many different things, from the influx of people coming when Bell Bomber opened its doors, people from all over the state of Georgia. About 80% of the employees at Bell Bomber were from Georgia, all over the state. But then you had representation from every state in the union at the time, 48 states. If you came from New York, which was upstate New York.
But it was an industrial area, upstate New York.
Yeah, well, it was Bell Aircraft Corporation's headquarters, and so you had upstate New York coming into the Deep South, and so there was a lot of culture clash going on there, and a lot of the New Yorkers and some of the others were supervisors, and that created some culture clash because the Confederacy and the North and the South, that differentiation was still very vibrant in the 1940s. So it was something that took some time to digest. There was a lot of concern when the plant was announced and was coming here, what was going to happen to the tranquility of this small community. But with the bomber plant came a lot of patriotism. That was something that ultimately the call to support our military and support our troops has been something that's intrinsic to this community. Yeah. And they stepped up to the plate and put aside a lot of different things and built 668 B-29s. Since then, the community has long had, that same patriotism that supports the military community, that supports the defense industry. One of my favorite stories from the Bell Bomber plant was they were building a B-29, and a couple of lads posted some dollar bills on the front of one to raise some money for a couple of different drives, if you will. Yeah. In the end, they raised, I think it was $1,400 and some odd dollars, but one of it was a Confederate note. And somebody posted a Confederate note on the nose of this B-29 to show that rebels and Yankees were working together to build the aircraft.
Well, that's a great point. I never thought of that. But give people an idea of the size of the Bell Bomber plant, the number of people that were involved, like in the construction and how big the facility is and all that.
It is an immense plant. To say the least, one of the ways that it was described in the 1940s when it was being built was it could house the entire nation's cotton crop under one roof. Wow. And I'm going to draw a blank on the exact square footage, but I believe it's right at, the B1 building is right out, I think it's 1.4 million square feet. It's just an amazing size, and to think that it was climate controlled so that they could deal with the metal easier. Yeah. So it was the biggest manufacturing facility in the South. Went into an area that had very little skilled labor at the time. But at the same time, there were a lot of unofficially skilled labor. A lot of farmers came into play. A lot of other tradesmen came into play to work at the plant, and they were used to working with tools.
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned that. I worked at a nuclear plant, and we brought in a team to put in a little plant for us, purify water, and they were all farmers. And they kind of laughed. And I said, how did you guys do conduit welding I mean, reverse osmosis machines. They were operating forklifts because we do this all the time on farms.
And that was one of the things that the area was selected for a number of reasons. It was away from coastal bombing perimeters. It was near a railroad, and it had a huge workforce with the metropolitan Atlanta area. But the labor wasn't as necessarily experienced at heavy industry. And here they were turning out the most technologically advanced machine at the time, the B-29 Superfortress. I like to think that a lot of that was the craftsman skills that they learned working on their own equipment, working on their different tools, creating things exactly for them.
And you have to be creative when you don't have a bunch of money, and farmers are known to have a bunch of money and resources.
Yeah, that's one of the things, when the plant came here, the government was dumping a lot of money into the plant, and the community was stepping up to put a lot of resources on the ground for child care, for housing. There was a huge housing crisis here with the influx of people. Just a number of different things that, when you have such a mass influx of people, brought. And it was something that I remember in some of my research coming across, articles around the country that were describing Marietta as the boom town that didn't go boom because it handled it so well. It wasn't perfect by any means. There were some naysayers. There were people that were excited about it. It brought an amazing wage increase to the local population. And, that was something, but a lot of the people weren't coming to work necessarily strictly for the wages. My research has shown a lot of people that were just wanting to do their part. Right. There was, a number of people that just wanted to do their part to support the war effort, and this was their opportunity here locally. Yeah. So
I heard a story about African-American, housekeepers.
So there were a number of stories that were related to African-Americans working at the plant. Some of the workers, one of the oral histories that's at Kennesaw State University's archives was a Miss Ernestine Slade. And she had worked here, but there was some things that they had to do because of the local status quo and things like that. They were going to the Atlanta office to try and get hired because here at the local office there was some issues with
people
helping.
Preventing them from getting a job because it's like, I'm going to lose my best housekeeper. Exactly. Even though it's a great thing for her.
Exactly. And so, it's
she went to Atlanta, got the job, and worked up in Marietta.
They would go to Atlanta to the Bell Bombers hiring office down in Atlanta to avoid some of the local small politics, if you will. So it's really interesting to see. And, one of my favorite stories about building the plant was an African-American laborer that, when asked why he was working in the rain, he didn't mention the wages. He didn't mention anything else. He said, I'm a committee, and I'm going to butcher it, and this is paraphrasing, but he said, I'm a committee for victory of one. He was committed to working to get this plant done. He was a World War I veteran. He had been wounded in World War I, and apparently he knew what getting this plant up and running meant. And that goes back to the patriotism that this community has shown from very early on.
Yeah, and they turned the plant around. They built it and got the first one off the line. And how much time did it take?
I don't remember the exact time. I think it was about 16 months, if I remember correctly, from groundbreaking to the first B-29 roaring down the runway. And I think that was November 4th, if I remember right, 1943.
Yeah, and you think about not only African Americans, but women in the workforce. Talk about that.
Rosie the Riveter, something that we've all probably come to know, but...
Yeah, I see your pin on your chest there. Yeah, we can do it.
That's something that we want to talk about here at the museum and in this community. About 37% of the workforce at Bell Bomber were women, and that was something that was revolutionary for the time, so to speak. And
I wonder what it is now.
That I don't. It's fairly balanced, honestly, to the best of my knowledge. I don't know the exact statistics, but this was something that went from women doing domestic duties to working in a plant, wearing pants. I have a great picture from one of the Bell. It's called the Bell Ringer, and it shows an older Confederate woman in a very traditional, full-length dress.
I got to see this picture.
And then it shows a younger woman in her Bell overalls. And so it's kind of that culture clash. You had the Confederate widow mixed with the younger woman in Bell overalls. So you had a lot of differences showing up in one picture.
Yeah, but it's fascinating that we had that vision and mission. We're going to defeat the Nazis and Japan, and we all came together and set aside all those differences.
And that's one of the things that was unique about the time is there were a lot of issues that were still ongoing with racial tensions and with some other things that were growing, but at the same time there was a common enemy that could easily be identified. And in his fireside chat in February of 43, I believe, President Roosevelt was talking about we can only lose this war by sniping at each other. And he was calling for more plants and better plants, and one more plane today might make a difference tomorrow. And that's something that we're going to have in an upcoming exhibit here at the museum that's talking about people coming together. Yeah. And it's something in 1943 that happened that's kind of timely for today's social environment. It's very polarizing, and still have common enemies. We still have things that unite us. It's just we have to have the courage to step up and say our differences can't divide us that much, much like 1940s here in Georgia, across the country.
Yeah, and it's so funny that the whole transformation of Marietta, you think about it beforehand and afterwards. We beat the enemy by cranking out B-29s, and I think the movie I saw, Tora, and everybody was so excited in the Japanese high command that we had beaten the Americans and got them by surprise. And I think the line was, we just woke a sleeping bear. And this museum represents, what happened afterwards.
Well, it does. It represents the impact that this community has had on global affairs. I mean, you look at the plane behind us here is the C-141B Starlifter that was the backbone of Military Airlift Command for 40 plus years.
And when did that start?
In the early or mid-1960s is when this aircraft went in service.
So it was supporting Vietnam and getting troops. And
Absolutely. It was hauling a lot of beans, bullets, and personnel to Vietnam, wherever the country was needing different things, and our allies. This actually is a stretch version, which is something that we learned from our impacts in the Yom Kippur War, where we were supporting Israel. They learned, hey, we can put more materials on this plane, but we need more volume. So they stretched the plane actually 23 feet and added aerial refueling. We didn't have to stop anywhere. We could fly wherever we needed to go in support of our military. So the C-5 was another aircraft built here locally that was flying into Israel, with materials for our allies into Vietnam. So it's something that around the world, up until even Hurricane Katrina, domestic affairs and natural disasters, the local community has built aircraft that has had a global impact with the C-141. Behind you is the C-130, which first took flight in 1954. We still today see them regularly flying around the area because they're still building them. So this particular one was in 1956, was accepted, served in Southeast Asia about 4,000 combat hours. And today we have it as a display for what aviation is in this community. There's 2,700 of them. I'm not sure the exact number that they've produced now, but it's been in use in around 70 countries around the world. And it's, again, been combat, humanitarian, scientific, you name a use for a cargo aircraft, and the C-130 has fulfilled that role. So, it's something that's special to this local community, special to a lot of our staff because they helped build them.
I got you. So I think about the Luftwaffe and how the Air Force changed in World War II, and how the B-29s, all the fighter aircraft are being created, and how important the Air Force became in World War II. And this was kind of one of the epicenters of cranking out ways that we could shorten a war.
If you've ever been charged with a crime, well, you're in a crisis situation. And if I were you, I'd contact Kim Fry and the rest of the folks at the Fry Law Group, 170 Anderson Street here in Marietta, Georgia. They will take good care of you. And like me, she listens to your story. She understands your story and asks good questions so she can give you the best result possible. Our law system in this country is adversarial, so you need someone on your side that fights for you. And Kim has many, many positive 5-star ratings on Google, 69 to be exact. Contact Kim Fry and the Fry Law Group, 170 Anderson Street, Marietta, 770-919-9525, or you can go to their website, frylawgroup.com. That's FRYE lawgroup.com.
You know, when John Sylvie reached out to me to be a sponsor of Marietta Stories podcast, I jumped at the chance. I love the guy. He's a humanitarian. He's a small business owner. He's a franchise owner, and he cares so much about Marietta. I got him on the show last year. I was not disappointed. He works hard every day. He only sleeps like 3 to 4 hours a day. Why? Because he's got a lot to do to make Marietta better. And he does a lot right at the Zaxby's. 591 South Marietta Parkway. Go check it out and tell him Bill Nowicki sent you.
Absolutely. Air power kind of came into its own in World War II. You know, it had been used in World War I, but the tactics weren't really developed. The different roles of the aircraft weren't necessarily implemented. And so World War II was a time of rapid change for aerial vehicles. And it went from bombers and fighters and observation and transport and, you know, just a number of different things that revolutionized warfare. We built 668 B-29s, which was a portion. It was a Boeing license, but Bell was working here with building the Boeing licensed product, as were several other plants around the country. After the war, plant was shut down briefly, and then Lockheed moved in, but they went back and refurbished in the Korean era, in the early Cold War, a few hundred B-47s, which was another Boeing product, but it was instrumental to the global impact, the early Cold War. All these aircraft that you see around the site here have a relation and an impact on global affairs, from early jet age with the F-84F over here. The OV-1 was an observation and reconnaissance type aircraft for.
Man, I'm surprised I got that.
No, you're for the Army. Behind up here, the Navy aircraft are all naval assets that had an impact. You know, the F-14, the A-4, the A-6, the A-7, and the S-3, point or another, were carrier launched, and we could project our power from anywhere in the world. We didn't need a base nearby. We took our base with us.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so what will people expect when they come here and they show up in your hours, or what's your days and hours and stuff?
So our public exploration hours are Friday and Saturday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and then on Sundays from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. Now, because we are all outdoors, that is weather dependent.
Permitting.
Yeah, if it's raining, we're going to be closed. But they'll see 13 aircraft out here that have a major influence on global affairs and have a local connection. That's kind of the important part of our mission, is the local military and aviation legacy. Yeah. If they have the opportunity to talk to any of our knowledgeable docents or staff, they're going to hear some amazing stories. Mm-hmm. You know, everything from building the aircraft and the pride that was instilled in local community members who were crafting these aircraft, to people that were the end user, right, flying them, servicing them, maintaining them. You know, it's a complete team effort to keep one of these aircraft in service. So that's the interesting thing, but they're going to be able to explore the aircraft up close. And
can you go inside?
So we can go inside the C-141 because we actually own that aircraft. Some of the other aircraft are on loan from the United States Air Force and the United States Navy, and we do not have permission to allow the public into those. We're only allowed in for inspection, maintenance, such. So unfortunately, we cannot go in all the aircraft, but we can go in the 141 and go all the way up and sit in the flight deck.
Yeah, let's do that. Oh, so tell me a little bit more about your journey. How did you get interested in aircraft?
So I grew up in the Midwest and central Indiana. As a young man or a young student, my brothers and I were interested in aviation. We frequently went to air shows throughout the Midwest. We were at least annually at the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, and it just kind of inspired an appreciation for aviation, for military aviation, for the military in general. Our dad served in the Army, and that was something that was special, and service to your nation was special to us from a very early age.
Yeah.
So come on in.
All right, here we are at the back of the C-141. Did they bring dead soldiers and folks back on these?
That's absolutely a part of the story. This aircraft was used for field hospital. These stanchions could be fitted with stretchers to hold wounded, and it becomes a flying hospital. It also would hold deceased American soldiers, and there's a number of iconic pictures showing the 141 in that unfortunate duty. It held POWs. You know, when POWs were coming out of Vietnam, there's an iconic picture that was well publicized in the 70s. Back in 1975, they were sitting in airline seats just like these up here. It was not this aircraft. It was one of the fellow fleet of C-141s. But so this aircraft flew beans, bullets, and people wherever the United States government needed something moved. Mm-hmm. The C-141 was a major player in that logistical pattern.
Yeah. So back to your story.
So growing up, like I said, we developed, and it's something that's always been close to my interest with aviation and military history. And so I moved down here as a young adult, got involved in the land development business and construction. And at some point in my life, I decided that this was my true passion. Mm-hmm. And so I closed down my business, if you will, and set out to become a professional. And that involved an undergraduate degree in history and a master's degree in history with a specialization in public history or museum studies. So, and that's one of those things that the opportunity came to volunteer with. Knowing some of the staff at the Marietta Museum of History, I had the opportunity to volunteer with them and focus on this side. And then as things grew, we separated the museum off of the Marietta Museum of History and became our own legal entity. And so that's where we're at now. And I have the privilege to work with an amazing group of volunteers and to try and lead this organization to our next chapter, building this into an asset that represents what this aviation has meant to this community and be a first-class asset for the community, about the community, and with the support of the community.
Yeah, it must be so many layers to this story, isn't it? That you learn something every day?
It's never a dull moment. Unfortunately, with the administrative side of things and being the director here, I have a lot of duties that sometimes are administrative. And you don't get to always enjoy everything, but when I do have the opportunity to take part in a lot of our things, to see, we had a dedication for this aircraft back in November of last year. So kind of in the middle of COVID, we still decided to have the dedication because our volunteers had spent 13 years working on this airplane, restoring it from what was essentially destined for the scrapyard into what you see now, which is...
Where was it?
It was originally flown into Lockheed for assessment of some, if I remember correctly, some stress fractures in the wing. Oh, okay. It was deemed that it was not worth repairing. It sat in Lockheed's boneyard for about 10 years or so until one of our board members and longtime volunteers out here, Mr. Bill Payton, remembered it. He is a former Lockheed engineer, and he talked them into donating it to the museum. Oh, wow. That was about 2007. From that point forward, about 15 or 20 of our volunteers have been responsible for fundraising, reinstalling both wings. Just back in 2019, they were able to secure engines from another aircraft and put them on the airplane. And so now it looks like a completely restored aircraft. And, and it's something that was 13 years in the making and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears from our staff.
That must have been an emotional moment when they dedicated
it. It was, and that's one of the reasons that we wanted to go ahead and push forward with it. And we put out for, an open event, if you will. And we ended up with about 350 people coming to Marietta for this dedication from 22 different states. And, it represented a large segment of the American population from California, the Four Corners, California, Washington State, New York, Michigan, Florida. We had people coming in from everywhere to be a part of the dedication for this aircraft. It was that special to them in their careers, whether they were, building it, flying it, maintaining it. Some of the people were jumping out of it. So it was very emotional. It was very special. It was made my job easy to be so proud. I wasn't involved in any of it, and I don't want to take any of the credit, but it was something to be proud of the team that I work with.
Yeah. That must have been great. All right, so let's go back to the 141 there. All right, so it's a pretty long. How long is it internally? Externally, it's 168 feet long. Okay. So internally, it's probably 120-ish. So originally, the aircraft was 23 feet shorter.
After some lessons learned in real-world usage, they added a little over a 12-feet plug here in front and an 11-foot plug in the back, making this essentially like a stretched limousine.
Did they have to change the engines?
No. The aircraft had the power, it had everything to sustain flight and carry the weight, it just did not have the volume. So if you look out in the back of the plane, there is a pallet. That is a military pallet they would use for aircraft. It's not like a pallet you might see at Costco. It's a lot larger than that.
Right.
But the aircraft originally could carry about 10 pallets. It went to 13 pallets at that point in time once they stretched it. So that's 3 more pallets every flight this aircraft took.
That adds up.
That many more personnel it could carry. I just added to it. And at the same time, they added the aerial refueling receptacle on the top side of the flight deck, which meant we didn't have to rely on allies to allow us landing rights to refuel. We could take off, meet up with a tanker somewhere over the Atlantic, and fly directly to wherever we needed to go, whether it be Israel or, the Middle East, somewhere like that. C-141s were the first aircraft on the ground in Desert Storm. When we started our build-up for the original Desert Storm, C-141 fleet was the one that carried a lot of men, women, equipment, food, battle tools, and so forth.
And what's the longest flight that you know of?
I don't know the longest flight per se. I know some of our staff was involved with some of the early training missions for the aerial refueling. Mr. Boone Barnes was a navigator, and he has talked about one of his training missions was from, if I remember correctly, Charleston to somewhere in Germany, and then back to Charleston without refueling, which was approximately 22 hours.
Yeah. Wow. All right, so let's head over to the cockpit, see what things look like. It's kind of small. All right, so here we are in the cockpit of the C-141.
Yeah, so as you can see, it's kind of an airline-style flight deck. It's roomy once you get up here. Mm-hmm. The pilot would be here on the left front seat, co-pilot. Over here, you can see a lot of the redundancy in the controls. Back here, this would be the navigator station if they were performing airdrops, some of the other things that would need precision flying. The navigator would be the one that would be reading the maps that you see, using the navigational equipment overhead here, and telling everybody where to go, so to speak. Behind you is the flight engineers panel, and you can see he has a rather large collection of...
There's a lot of stuff on that one.
Gauges, buttons, switches that are monitoring all 4 of the engines, hydraulic systems, the electrical systems, these several hundred breakers that are here on the panel. So, I mean, there's just a lot to take in for the crew to lead this. So this would be the 4 positions up here. There would be a load master that would be responsible for the balance.
I was wondering about that. It must have been really critical to get the balance right.
Getting the balance is essential. There's been aircraft crash because of not having that, or a shifting cargo. So tying it down and having the balanced load and knowing exactly what the load was so that you could calculate out fuel mileage, altitude, speed, everything else was essential to the entire mission. So everybody had a critical role, and it's a demonstration of the teamwork that's involved for these aircraft. So it's not just the 5 or 6 people that are actually on the plane that are air crew, it's the people that are maintaining it. A few loose bolts can be catastrophic when you get to 30 or 40,000 feet. So up here is where a lot of the action took place, but back here was the mission, if you will.
Right. Yeah, and I was in the military too, and that was the one thing it's hard to replicate outside the military, which is you depend from the lowest private to the captain. You got to depend on everybody.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that we want to work with a lot of our younger guests and some of our school groups that come in here is the importance of teamwork, because the aircraft are not just about the pilot. They're about a lot of different people, and each of the aircraft in itself works into a team. So the Air Force, the Navy, every part of the military, and even civilian aviation, all of them have a different role. Some of them are multi-role, but ultimately every aircraft has a different role that they work together. The people work together, the aircraft work together, and it accomplishes common goals.
Right. It's amazing. I've driven by here hundreds of times, and I was like, I got to go in there. And meeting you and understanding all this and how transformative it was for our community and how it still is here for the whole community is amazing. It must be special for you to be in this job.
It's difficult, but it is special, and it's something that, as I said before, we want to turn this into a first-class asset for our community, about our community, and with the help of our community. It's amazing to me sometimes the challenges that we face, just because I may be biased, but I believe in my research that this is part of the community's core. It really
DNA?
is part of our DNA. And so building this up and getting it off the ground, we separated off a couple of years ago, and so we're still kind of in our infancy. The museum's been through a couple of shakeups and some other things, but we're fundraising for a permanent building that will give us room to have indoor display of some amazing assets that we have, give us some exhibition space, give us an indoor classroom. And that's important for the community to get behind and realize that STEM is a huge part of our future. Aviation is very, much part of our history. Connecting those two items is where the Aviation History and Technology Center really can fill a role in our community. At the same time, it can be a interface for the public and military communities here locally. There's not a lot of ways for those two to necessarily interface with security and some other things, but there's some organizations here with the Honorary Commanders Association and some other groups that help to do that, and we want to try and be a part of that and allow the community to show our appreciation for the military, for the National Guard, and go from there. It's a tall task, but there's never been a day that I didn't want to come in and tackle things head on.
Right. Well, I'm sure you need help. How can people help you if they hear this podcast and like, man, I really want to see what I could do to help? What should they do?
Honestly, there's so many ways that you can get involved with the museum and help us out. From something as simple as in-kind donations. If your business does a certain thing that we could help with, things as simple as cutting grass and printing, and there's so many different things that the museum takes on. Volunteering, it's something that you don't have to be an aviation expert. You just need to have the desire to want to build a better community. And that's what our museum is about bridging generational gaps, bridging different communities together. And so you have to want to be a part of that. It could be helping with maintenance of the facilities, maintenance of the aircraft. We have a select group that comes out on the weekends when we're open to the public and wants to meet, greet, and share a little bit of their knowledge with the community. Obviously, there's financial support. That's something that we are struggling to get behind us. We operate on a very tight budget, and that's something that we're okay with because we try and focus our resources on public impact. It's not put into a lot of things that are necessarily superficial, but it's how can we have the greatest impact on our community. So it's networking. It's just being an advocate for the museum and telling people about us. There's any number of ways. You're helping with just this right here. Any number of ways that we want to find ways that people are passionate about, and find ways that we can build their community, build our community, accomplish their goals, and accomplish our goals. And that's kind of an open conversation.
Is it through the website, or what's the best way? Phone numbers?
So our website is www.ahtc360.org. Okay. The phone number is 770-919-5700. Either one of those, if you look around the website on the top bar, you'll see a section that says Get Involved. Yeah. And it pops up from donations of artifacts, to monetary donations, to volunteering, to corporate sponsors, to any number of things that people can engage. And at the same time, pick up the phone and call myself, and let's have a conversation about how we can better represent our community, better show appreciation for what aviation has meant to this community and what the military means to this community today.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time, Brad. This has been totally fascinating to me, and I'm glad you're in the position that you are to help get the whole story out there and tell the great story of the Bell Bomber plant and Lockheed.
Well, we appreciate being a part of your podcast, and we hope to talk to you again soon.
Thanks to Doug and Brad Hawkins over at the Aviation Museum. Check them out. They're off of Atlanta Road, just south of the South Loop. This is Bill Nowicki saying thanks for listening to Marietta Stories Podcast. Tell a couple of friends about the show, and go to visitmariettagA.com to get all the upcoming events in Marietta.